The rain pounded against the window pane like an angry fist as I sat alone in our bedroom. His bedroom now, I supposed. My hands trembled as I clutched his phone, the screen still illuminated with messages that had shattered my world just moments before. I'd only picked it up to silence the incessant buzzing while he showered. I never meant to invade his privacy. I never expected to find what I did. Can't wait to feel you again tomorrow? She'll be at her mother's all weekend. Our bed will be waiting. Our bed. The bed where he'd held me just last night, whispering promises of forever. The bed where he'd proposed 6 months ago, sliding that absurdly expensive diamond ring onto my finger while promising me eternity. The bed I'd been mentally positioning our future children in during those quiet moments before sleep. I couldn't breathe. The walls of our immaculate Hamptons house, his pride and joy, the $1 million monument to his success, seemed to close in around me. 5 years together, and it took 5 seconds to destroy it all. The shower water stopped running. I had maybe 2 minutes before he'd walk out, hair damp, smelling of that ridiculously overpriced cologne I'd given him for Christmas. 2 minutes to decide whether to confront him or pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen. 2 minutes to choose between explosion and calculated silence. I chose silence. Not out of cowardice, but instinct. Something primordial inside me whispered that knowledge was power, and I'd just gained the upper hand without him realizing it. I placed his phone exactly where I'd found it and moved to the window, wiping away tears I hadn't even realized were falling. "Hey babe, what are you doing up? Thought you'd be asleep by now." His voice was casual, normal, the voice of a man with no idea his world was about to implode. I turned, forcing my face into neutrality, just watching the storm. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I fought the urge to recoil from his touch. "Always loved how you get all poetic about weather," he murmured, kissing my neck. "You all packed for your moms tomorrow?" The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking audacity. "Almost," I managed, wondering if he could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'll miss you," he said, and I wondered how many times he'd practiced these little deceptions, how many weekends I'd spent with family while he entertained women in our bed. "But I've got those investment meetings anyway." "Probably for the best. I'd just distract you from quality mother-daughter time." Investment meetings. Right. I wanted to scream, to claw at his perfect face, to demand answers about who she was and how long it had been going on. Instead, I turned in his arms and kissed him softly. "Forever together, right?" I whispered against his lips, echoing the phrase engraved inside my engagement ring. He smiled that $1 million smile that had first made me fall for him at that charity gala 5 years ago. "Forever together," he confirmed, utterly unaware that in that moment I was already plotting his downfall. I barely slept that night. I lay beside him, studying the contours of his face in the dim glow of the alarm clock, cataloging every feature I'd once found endearing that now seemed sinister. The slight curl of his lips even in sleep, as if he were keeping secrets. The strong jaw that had probably chiseled declarations of love to countless others. The impossibly long eyelashes that had blinked away tears during his proposal. Morning came with brutal efficiency. I packed my overnight bag as planned, kissed Daniel goodbye, and drove 30 minutes to my mother's house in Southampton. But I never went inside. I parked down the street, waited 20 minutes, then drove back toward our house, my heart a thundering drum in my chest. I parked a half-mile away, in the lot of the small coffee shop where Daniel and I used to spend Sunday mornings before his success made such quaint traditions beneath him. I walked the rest of the way, keeping to the tree line of our property, feeling like an intruder in my own life. And then I saw her. She arrived in a sleek red convertible, parking right in our driveway as if she belonged there. Tall, blonde, young, so young she could have been one of my high school students. She didn't even hesitate at the door. She had a key. My key. The spare I kept hidden in the planter by the garage. I watched her let herself into my house with the casual confidence of someone who had done it many times before. Something broke inside me then, something fundamental and irreparable. I sank to my knees in the wet grass, suddenly unable to stand under the weight of this new reality. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just sex. This was established. Routine. She knew where the key was hidden. She walked into my home like she owned it. I don't remember much of the next few hours. I know I somehow made it back to my car. I know I drove aimlessly, tears blurring the coastal highway into a smear of blues and greens. I know I ended up at a motel so dismal it rented rooms by the hour, where I paid cash for 2 nights and collapsed onto sheets that smelled of industrial bleach and despair. I lay there, staring at water stains on the ceiling, as my phone vibrated with messages from Daniel, checking to see if I'd arrived safely. Each notification was like a fresh slap. Eventually, I responded with a cheerful lie about having a wonderful time with my mother. He replied with a heart emoji, a heart, as if his still existed. Sometime around midnight, I found myself standing in the motel bathroom, studying my reflection under harsh fluorescent lights. I'd always been confident in my appearance, not in a vain way, but in the way someone who's been consistently told they're beautiful comes to accept it as fact. Yet suddenly I found myself cataloging flaws, the subtle smile lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago, the slightly softer curve of my waist, the single gray hair I'd discovered last month and plucked with horrified fascination. Was this why? Had I aged out of desirability in his eyes at the ancient age of 32? Was the 20-something in my bed the physical manifestation of Daniel's fear of mortality? Or was it simpler than that? Had he simply never been capable of the forever he'd promised? I splashed cold water on my face and felt something harden within me. This pity party wasn't solving anything. I'd spent enough time in the shock and grief phase. I needed answers. I needed evidence. And eventually, I would need justice. Morning came, and with it, clarity. I checked out of the motel and drove to the one place I knew would offer sanctuary without questions, my best friend Mia's apartment in the city. I'd met Mia during my first year teaching high school English when she was the overwhelmed new art teacher across the hall. We'd bonded over student chaos and inadequate coffee, and she'd remained my constant even as Daniel had slowly isolated me from other friends. "Holy shit, Emma!" she gasped when she opened her door to find me standing there, undoubtedly looking like I'd been hit by an emotional freight train. "What happened?" I collapsed into her arms, the story pouring out of me in ugly, hiccuping sobs. She listened without interruption, her expression darkening with each revelation until I finished with, "And now I don't know what to do." Mia pulled me inside, settled me on her paint-splattered couch, and handed me a glass of wine that didn't match the early hour but perfectly matched my emotional state. "That absolute fucking bastard," she finally said, her voice quiet but vibrating with anger. "I never liked him." "You always liked him," I corrected dully. "I tolerated him because you loved him," she clarified. "There's a difference. The way he slowly cut you off from people, the way he always had to be the smartest person in the room, the way he'd subtly put you down in public then laugh it off as a joke. I saw it, Em. I just didn't know how to tell you." I stared at her, memories reshuffling themselves in my mind, moments I'd dismissed taking on new significance. "Why didn't you say something?" She sighed, tucking her bright blue hair behind her ear. "Because every time I tried to hint at it, you defended him so completely. And I was afraid if I pushed too hard, he'd convince you to cut me off too. So I stayed close, hoping you'd see it eventually, or that I was wrong." She took my hand. "I'm so sorry I didn't try harder." "It's not your fault," I said automatically, though part of me wanted to be angry at her too. Anger felt better than pain. "Besides, would I have listened? Probably not," she admitted. "You were in love. We all have blinders when we're in love." I took a deep breath. "I need to figure out what to do now." "Well, the obvious answer is to dump his cheating ass and take him for everything he's worth," Mia said, refilling my wineglass. "Isn't adultery still grounds for a more favorable divorce settlement in New York?" "I think so," I said slowly, "but I need proof. Real proof. Not just what I saw in text messages and through a window. So get proof," she said simply. "You're staying here this weekend anyway, right? He thinks you're at your mom's. That gives you time to think and him time to leave evidence." The idea took root immediately. "I need to be smart about this," I said, more to myself than to Mia. "I can't let him know I suspect anything until I have everything I need." "That's my girl," Mia smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Strategic thinking." Though personally, I'd be more tempted to set his designer clothes on fire in the front yard. Despite everything, I laughed, a broken, rusty sound, but a laugh nonetheless. Don't think I haven't considered it. We spent the rest of the day outlining a plan. I would return to my mother's on Sunday as scheduled, maintain the appearance of normalcy with Daniel, and begin gathering evidence of his infidelity. Meanwhile, I would quietly consult a divorce attorney to understand my options. Daniel had insisted on a prenuptial agreement, ironically to protect his assets in case I ever betrayed him, but Mia reminded me that infidelity clauses often nullified certain protections. "What about the house?" I asked, thinking of the beautiful Hamptons property that had once represented our future and now felt tainted. "It's in his name, but I helped design every inch of it. I chose the materials, oversaw the renovations. One thing at a time," Mia counseled. "Focus on proving the affair first. Once you have that, you'll have leverage. Then you can decide what you want. The house, money, his left kidney, whatever feels like justice to you." Justice. The word resonated in my chest. What would justice even look like in this situation? Could anything truly repair the devastation of betrayal? Saturday night I barely slept, my mind racing with plans and contingencies. Sunday morning, I hugged Mia goodbye and drove to my mother's house, where I spent an awkward few hours pretending I'd been there all weekend before heading home to the beautiful house that now felt like a mausoleum for my dead relationship. Daniel greeted me with a hug that made my skin crawl and a passionate kiss that took every ounce of my acting ability to return convincingly. "How was your mom?" he asked, taking my overnight bag. "Same as always," I said, surveying the house for signs of the other woman. Everything looked immaculate. Too immaculate. The cleaner didn't come until Tuesdays. "How were your meetings?" "Productive," he said vaguely. "Mostly boring financial stuff you wouldn't be interested in." I swallowed the urge to ask if boring financial stuff was his new euphemism for sleeping with someone barely out of college. Instead, I smiled. "I'm going to take a shower." "Long drive?" In the master bathroom, I examined everything with new, suspicious eyes. The shower was spotless. No stray blonde hairs clinging to the drain. The counters gleamed. He'd even changed the sheets. Daniel, who in 5 years had never once voluntarily changed bedding. I ran my hand along his side of the mattress and imagined them there together, laughing about the wife who was too stupid to notice. That night, I lay beside him planning my next moves while he slept the untroubled sleep of the morally bankrupt. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and left for work at Southwick Academy, the private high school where I'd taught English literature for the past 6 years. Teaching that day was surreal. I discussed Gatsby's obsession with Daisy with my seniors, all while contemplating my own illusory relationship. I analyzed Lady Macbeth's manipulation tactics with juniors, while mentally cataloging Daniel's subtle gaslighting over the years. By the time final bell rang, I was emotionally exhausted but resolute. Instead of going home, I drove to the office of Patricia Winters, a divorce attorney Mia had recommended. Patricia was in her 50s, with sharp eyes, a sharper mind, and no patience for nonsense. "So," she said after I'd explained my situation, "you suspect infidelity but have no concrete proof beyond text messages you viewed briefly and observations through a window. Neither would hold up well in court." "I know," I admitted. "That's why I'm here. I need to know how to gather evidence properly." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "New York is a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity remains one of the grounds for a fault-based divorce, which can impact financial settlements, especially with your prenuptial situation." She tapped her pen against a legal pad. "Tell me about this prenup." I explained the agreement I'd signed 5 years ago, the one Daniel had insisted was just a formality, and something his financial advisor recommended. Patricia's expression grew increasingly grim as I outlined the terms. "This is quite restrictive," she noted. "However, there is an infidelity clause that works in your favor. If either party commits adultery, they forfeit 50% of the assets they would otherwise be entitled to keep under the agreement." Hope flickered in my chest. "So if I can prove he cheated, you'd be in a much stronger position," she confirmed. "But the proof needs to be solid. Text messages can be misinterpreted or denied. What we need is photographic evidence, witness testimony, credit card statements showing hotel rooms or gifts." She hesitated. "There are also private investigators who specialize in these matters, though that's an additional expense." I thought of the joint account Daniel had insisted we maintain, where my teacher's salary was deposited alongside the considerable income from his investment firm, an account he monitored closely. "I'd need to be careful about expenses he might notice." Patricia nodded understanding. "Then we start with what you can do without raising suspicions. Check phone records, they're usually itemized on bills. Look for repeated numbers, especially calls or texts at unusual hours. Check credit card and bank statements for unexplained withdrawals or charges. If he has a computer at home, check the browser history." She leaned forward. "But Emma, be very careful. Men like your husband, wealthy, connected, controlling, they don't respond well to being caught. The warning sent a chill through me. Was Daniel capable of more than emotional betrayal? I'd never considered him physically dangerous, but then I'd never considered him an adulterer either. Think about what you want the outcome to be, Patricia continued. Full divorce? Separation? Reconciliation with counseling? Different paths require different strategies. I hadn't allowed myself to fully envision the end goal yet. The pain was still too raw, the betrayal too fresh. But her question forced me to confront it. I want ... My voice caught. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Peace? I want what's fair. I put my life into that relationship, into that house. I supported him when his business was just starting, worked extra tutoring jobs to help with bills. I deserved better than this. Patricia's expression softened marginally. Then let's make sure you get what you deserve. Gather what evidence you can, discreetly. We'll meet again next week to assess. I left her office with a strategy and something I hadn't felt since discovering the text messages: purpose. The hollow ache in my chest remained, but alongside it grew a steady, cool determination. That evening I returned home and slipped seamlessly into the role of unsuspecting wife. I prepared dinner, Daniel's favorite pasta primavera, and listened to him talk about his day, searching his words for inconsistencies or clues. After dinner, when he retreated to his home office to catch up on emails, I began my first careful exploration. I started with the laundry, an innocuous enough activity that raised no suspicions. I checked pockets before washing, a normal precaution that gave me the perfect excuse to search his clothes. In the pocket of the suit he'd supposedly worn to investment meetings. Over the weekend, I found a matchbook from the Harborview Hotel, an upscale boutique hotel in Montauk. Daniel didn't smoke. Had never smoked. The matchbook was a small thing, but it made my heart race with vindication. First piece of evidence, located. Over the next 3 weeks, I built my case with meticulous care. I discovered that Daniel's repeated late meetings corresponded perfectly with nights when a certain cell number texted him shortly beforehand. I found charges on our joint credit card for dinners for two at restaurants on nights he'd told me he was working alone. I uncovered a second phone hidden in his golf bag, prepaid, untraceable, containing only one contact, saved simply as A. A for affair? A for adultery? A for the destruction of all we'd built? Each discovery was both painful and empowering. Every lie confirmed hardened my resolve and chipped away at any lingering love or doubt. The woman, whose name I eventually discovered was Amber, was 24, a former intern at Daniel's firm, and apparently a regular weekend guest in my home when I was conveniently absent. Throughout it all, I maintained a perfect facade of normalcy. I smiled at the right times, laughed at his jokes, and even initiated sex occasionally, though each time felt like a betrayal of myself. I needed him complacent, unsuspecting, and it worked. Daniel, so confident in his deception and my naivety, never once suspected that I was building a case against him, piece by damning piece. At my second meeting with Patricia, I presented my findings: the phone records, the credit card statements, the hotel receipts I'd carefully photographed from his wallet, and even pictures of text messages from his main phone that I'd managed to capture while he showered. "This is excellent work," Patricia said, reviewing my evidence. "Not quite smoking gun level yet, but certainly enough to establish a pattern that supports your allegations." She looked up at me. "The question now is, what's your next step? Do you want to confront him with this evidence and try to negotiate a settlement directly? Or do you want to file for divorce and let him be served with papers?" I had considered this question extensively over the past weeks. Confrontation would be satisfying but potentially messy. Daniel was charming when cornered. It was how he'd built his business success, and I feared my resolve might weaken face to face. Having him served would be cleaner, but would give him time to hide assets or craft counterarguments. "Neither," I said finally. "I want to continue gathering evidence. I want a case so airtight he can't squirm out of it." I leaned forward. "And I want to understand exactly what I'm entitled to under New York law if the prenup's infidelity clause is triggered." Patricia's eyebrow arched slightly, but she nodded. "Let's discuss assets, then." What followed was an education in matrimonial property law that would have been fascinating under different circumstances. I learned that while the prenup protected most of Daniel's business assets and his investments, the house was more complex. Though purchased in his name with his money during our marriage, my substantial contributions to its improvement potentially gave me a claim under New York's equitable distribution principles. The same applied to various artwork and furnishings I had selected and arranged. Your strongest play is still the infidelity clause, Patricia advised. With solid proof, you could potentially claim half of what he'd otherwise keep protected, plus a more favorable division of the marital assets. And what constitutes solid proof? I asked. In an ideal world, photos of them together in compromising positions, witness testimony, hotel records showing both their names, admissions in his own words or writing. She tapped the folder containing my evidence. This is good circumstantial evidence, but nothing a good attorney couldn't create alternate explanations for. I nodded slowly, my mind already formulating the next phase of my plan. I'll get what we need. The next day was Saturday, a day Daniel usually spent at his golf club, providing me with hours alone in the house. But as I was finishing breakfast, he surprised me by announcing, "I think I'll skip golf today. Weather report says rain later." I glanced out the window at the cloudless blue sky and swallowed my skepticism. "Oh, did you want to do something together instead?" I kept my tone light, interested, the voice of a wife happy to receive unexpected attention. He hesitated just a beat too long. "Actually, I need to run into the office for a bit, some quarterly reports to review. But I shouldn't be more than a couple hours. Maybe we could do lunch after?" My mind raced. Office on Saturday? The office that would be empty of witnesses? The office where Amber had once been an intern? I forced a smile. "Sure, sounds nice." After he left, I sat motionless at the kitchen table, the pieces clicking together in my mind. This was an opportunity. Perhaps the opportunity I'd been waiting for. I made a quick call to Mia. "I need your help," I said without preamble. "Can you meet me at Daniel's office building in an hour? And bring your camera, the good one with the zoom lens. The one I use for gallery documentation?" Mia asked, confusion evident in her voice. "That's the one. I'll explain when I see you." 90 minutes later, Mia and I sat in her car across the street from Daniel's Midtown office building. I'd explained my suspicions en route, and despite her initial reluctance, "This is borderline stalking, Em," she'd agreed to help. "If they're in there together, they'll have to come out eventually," I reasoned. "All we need is one clear photo of them together, looking couple-ish. Bonus points if they're kissing." "And then what?" Mia asked, adjusting her camera settings. "You confront him with it? Then I take it to my lawyer, along with everything else I've gathered," I said firmly. "And I make sure I get what I deserve in the divorce." Mia studied me with concern. "You've changed. Not in a bad way," she added quickly, "but you're harder now, more calculated. Betrayal will do that," I said simply. We waited in tense silence, watching the building entrance. 1 hour passed, then 2. I was beginning to think I'd miscalculated when the glass doors finally opened and Daniel emerged, with Amber. They weren't touching, maintaining a professional distance as they walked, but their body language screamed intimacy. The way they angled toward each other, the casual brush of shoulders, the private smile they shared. "Holy shit, you were right," Mia whispered, raising her camera. "They look comfortable together." "Get as many shots as you can," I urged, my heart pounding as vindication and fresh pain warred in my chest. Mia's camera clicked rapidly as Daniel and Amber walked to his car. Just before they reached it, he looked around quickly, a guilty man checking for witnesses, then leaned down to kiss her. Not a passionate embrace, but a familiar, casual kiss. The kind shared by people who kiss each other all the time. The kind we used to share. My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to watch as Mia captured the moment in high-resolution detail. After they drove away, she lowered the camera and looked at me with compassion. "You okay?" I realized I was digging my nails into my palms so hard I'd broken skin. I consciously relaxed my hands. "I'm fine. Did you get clear shots?" "Crystal clear," she confirmed, showing me the camera's display. There it was, undeniable evidence of Daniel's betrayal. My husband kissing another woman in broad daylight. "Are these enough, or do you want to follow them?" I considered it briefly, then shook my head. "This is enough for now. I need to get back before he does and act normal during our lunch date." Mia looked concerned. "You sure you can pull that off?" "You're shaking, Em." I hadn't noticed, but she was right. My hands trembled slightly as adrenaline coursed through my system. "I'll be fine by the time I get home. I've been acting for weeks, I can manage a few more hours." That lunch with Daniel was a masterclass in self-control. I smiled, laughed at his jokes, and pretended I hadn't just watched him kiss another woman. I asked about his quarterly reports, and nodded sympathetically when he complained about having to work weekends. I even reached across the table to squeeze his hand affectionately, ignoring the revulsion that rippled through me at the contact. "You know, he said as we finished dessert. We should plan a trip soon. Maybe the Caymans? It's been a while since we did something just for us. The Caymans, where his company allegedly had offshore accounts that weren't mentioned in our prenup. Interesting timing for such a suggestion. That sounds wonderful, I lied. When were you thinking? Maybe next month? I could use a break from the grind. His phone buzzed and he glanced at it, his expression carefully neutral. Sorry, work email. I didn't need to see the screen to know it wasn't work. The slight flush creeping up his neck told me everything. Amber was texting, probably wondering when he'd return to her after his obligatory lunch with the wife. No problem, I said easily. Work never stops for you successful types, does it? The next week passed in a blur of evidence gathering and strategic planning. Mia transferred the damning photos to a USB drive, which I delivered to Patricia along with hotel receipts showing Daniel had booked rooms under his company's name, rooms used on weekends when he claimed to be at investment meetings. This is excellent, Patricia said, reviewing the new evidence. With these photos and the financial documentation, we have a solid case that would trigger the infidelity clause in your prenup. She looked up at me. Are you ready to move forward with filing? I hesitated, thinking of the beautiful Hamptons house, the place I'd poured my heart into designing. According to Patricia, even with the infidelity clause triggered, the house would likely remain Daniel's property given the prenup's specific protections around real estate acquired during the marriage. There's something else I want to try first, I said slowly. Something that might give me more leverage. Patricia's expression grew cautious. I need to remind you that anything illegal could jeopardize your position in the divorce proceedings. Nothing illegal, I assured her. Just strategic. My plan was simple but required perfect timing and execution. From my evidence gathering, I knew Daniel had a pattern. Amber typically stayed over on Friday nights when I visited my mother monthly. The next such weekend was approaching, and I intended to use it. I told Daniel I'd be at my mother's as usual that Friday, but instead of going, I checked into a hotel near our home. Saturday morning, I called him, making sure to sound distressed. Daniel? Mom's not feeling well, some kind of stomach virus. I think I should come home early so I don't catch it too. There was a moment of silence on the line. Oh, he finally said, you're coming home now? I'll be there in about an hour, I said, almost enjoying the panic I could hear in his voice. Unless that's a problem? No problem, he said quickly. I wasn't expecting you, so the house is a bit messy. I had some colleagues over last night for drinks. Colleagues. Right. No worries about mess, I assured him brightly. See you soon. I gave him exactly 45 minutes, enough time to panic, get Amber out of the house and attempt to remove evidence of her presence, but not enough time to do a thorough job. Then I drove home. The scene that greeted me was exactly what I'd expected. Daniel, hair still damp from a hasty shower, looking stressed but attempting nonchalance. The house smelled of cleaning products and the windows were open despite the slight chill, airing out what I assumed was Amber's perfume. Hey babe, he said, kissing my cheek. Sorry about your mom. House is a bit of a disaster. You know how the guys get when we start talking investments and the scotch comes out. No problem, I said, setting down my overnight bag and looking around with exaggerated curiosity. Quite the party, huh? Just shop talk that went late? He said with a dismissive wave. Nothing exciting. I nodded and headed upstairs, ostensibly to unpack but actually to inventory what evidence Amber might have left behind in her hasty departure. In the master bathroom, I found what I was looking for, a single long blonde hair clinging to the shower wall that Daniel had missed in his rushed cleaning. I carefully collected it in a tissue and tucked it into my pocket. But the real prize came when I checked the guest room, the one farthest from our bedroom. The bed was made but showed subtle signs of recent use. The pillows weren't arranged the way I always left them, and the decorative throw was missing entirely. In the attached bathroom, the hand towel was slightly damp. Someone had slept here recently, not in the master bedroom. Interesting. Was Daniel getting careless, or was this a calculated move? If I confronted him about a woman in the house, he could claim his colleague had too much scotch and crashed in the guest room. Plausible deniability. I returned downstairs, my face a mask of wifely normality. Think I'll do some laundry since I'm home early. Do you have anything that needs washing? Daniel visibly relaxed, probably relieved I hadn't found some obvious evidence. There are a few things in the hamper, but don't worry about my gym clothes. I'll handle those later. I bet you will, I thought, smiling pleasantly. The laundry room revealed more than Daniel intended. Stuffed hastily into the bottom of the hamper were our bedroom sheets, clearly changed in a hurry that morning. Beneath them, partially hidden, was the missing decorative throw from the guest room. I stood staring at this evidence, a theory forming in my mind. Daniel and Amber had started in our bed but moved to the guest room at some point. Why? Had they argued? Or... The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Through the laundry room window, I could see a police car in our driveway. "I'll get it," Daniel called, his voice tight with what sounded like apprehension. I moved to the hallway, where I could hear the front door conversation without being seen. "Mr. Daniel Harrington?" a male voice asked. "Yes, that's me." "Is there a problem, officer?" "Sir, we received a call about a domestic disturbance at this address early this morning. A neighbor reported hearing a woman screaming and what sounded like a physical altercation around 3 a.m. My blood ran cold. A woman screaming? Physical altercation? There must be some mistake, Daniel said, his voice the perfect blend of confusion and courtesy. "I had some colleagues over for drinks last night, but everyone left by midnight and it was just men. No women, no arguments. Just business discussion. Your neighbors specifically reported a female voice in distress, sir. They were quite concerned." "I appreciate their vigilance," Daniel said smoothly, "but I assure you there was no woman here and no disturbance of any kind. My wife was away visiting her mother until she returned just a short while ago. You can ask her yourself." That was my cue. I moved toward the door, arranging my features into a mask of concerned confusion. "Is everything okay?" I asked, looking between Daniel and the two police officers. "Ma'am, we're following up on a report of a possible domestic incident at this address early this morning, around 3 a.m. I frowned, the picture becoming clearer by the second. "That's strange. I wasn't home. I was at my mother's house in Southampton until about half an hour ago. And you, sir?" The officer addressed Daniel. "You were home alone all night?" "That's right," Daniel confirmed. "Had some work friends over for drinks, but they left before midnight." The officer made a note in his pad. "And no one else was here? No other women?" "Absolutely not," Daniel said firmly. The second officer, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Sir, we have a witness who reported seeing a woman entering this house around 9 p.m. last night and then heard what sounded like an argument and a female crying out around 3 a.m. Daniel's composure slipped slightly. "Your witness is mistaken. Perhaps they confused our house with another on the street. The witness provided your specific address and described your vehicle, sir." A tense silence fell. I studied Daniel's face, seeing the calculations happening behind his eyes. "Well," he finally said, "I don't know what to tell you. There was no woman here and certainly no argument or whatever you're implying." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll make a note of your statement, Mr. Harrington. If you don't mind, we'd like to verify that there's no one else in the house who might need assistance." Daniel stiffened. "Do you have a warrant?" "We don't need one if there's reasonable concern for someone's safety, sir." I touched Daniel's arm, my expression perfectly concerned. "Daniel, it's fine. Let them check if it makes them feel better. We have nothing to hide." I turned to the officers. "Please, come in. Our home is open to you." The look Daniel gave me was a complex mixture of relief and suspicion. He hadn't expected me to facilitate the search, but refusing would have looked worse. The officers conducted a quick but thorough sweep of the house, finding nothing, of course. Amber was long gone. After they left, with apologies for the disturbance, Daniel poured himself a stiff drink despite the early hour. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Some neighbor with nothing better to do, making up stories." I sat across from him, mind racing. "It is strange," I agreed. "A woman screaming in our house at 3 a.m.? Daniel took a large swallow of his scotch. "People hear what they want to hear. Probably a TV turned up too loud or a catfight outside." I nodded thoughtfully. "Probably." I paused, then added casually, "Though it's odd they specifically mentioned a woman arriving around 9 p.m. That's detailed for a mistaken report." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "What are you suggesting, Emma?" I raised my hands in mock surrender. "Nothing. Just thinking out loud?" I stood and stretched. "I think I'll finish that laundry. The sheets could use a wash." His expression flickered just for a moment. "I already put them in the hamper." "I know," I said with a placid smile. "I saw them when I was sorting clothes." "So thoughtful of you to strip the bed. Usually I have to remind you it's laundry day." I left him with his drink and his thoughts, my mind frantically processing this new information. The police visit was an unexpected complication, but it had revealed something crucial. Something had happened between Daniel and Amber in the early morning hours, something that caused her to cry out loudly enough for neighbors to hear and report. Had he hurt her? The thought made me sick, not just for what it meant about the man I'd married, but for Amber herself. She was his affair partner, yes, but if he was physically abusive, that changed things significantly. I moved through the rest of the day in a strange fog, mechanically performing weekend chores while my mind whirred with new possibilities and concerns. Daniel remained on edge, drinking steadily and checking his phone repeatedly. He was worried, either about Amber or about the police report, or both. That night, I lay awake long after Daniel fell into an alcohol-induced sleep, listening to his rhythmic breathing and wondering about the woman who had screamed in my house. Did she need help? Was she safe now? The questions plagued me until dawn. Sunday morning brought another surprise. As I was preparing breakfast, Daniel announced he needed to go into the office again. "Weekend work 2 weeks in a row?" I asked lightly, sliding eggs onto a plate. "Your clients are demanding." "End of quarter," he said shortly, not meeting my eyes. "Should only be a few hours." After he left, I immediately called Mia. "I need your help again. Same place, same camera." An hour later, we watched from across the street as Daniel emerged from his building with Amber. This time, they weren't maintaining professional distance. He had his arm around her protectively, and she was leaning into him, looking up at his face as they talked intensely. Even from a distance, I could see the distress in her posture. "Something's wrong," Mia murmured, snapping photos. "She looks upset." "Keep shooting," I said quietly. They stopped by his car, and Amber's gestures became more animated. She was definitely agitated, pointing at something on her phone. Daniel took it from her, looked at the screen, then handed it back, his body language shifting from protective to defensive. Even from across the street, the tension between them was palpable. Mia's camera captured it all. The argument, the moment Daniel grabbed Amber's wrist when she tried to walk away, the way she yanked free and climbed into his car, arms crossed defensively. "Holy shit," Mia breathed as they drove away. "That did not look like a happy couple." "No," I agreed, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. "It didn't. What do you think happened?" I thought of the police report, the screaming at 3 a.m., the way they'd moved from our bed to the guest room. I don't know for sure, but I'm starting to think Daniel might have a violent side I never saw. Mia looked at me sharply. "Did he ever hurt you?" "No," I said truthfully. "Never. Not physically, anyway. Emotionally was another matter entirely. But something happened Friday night that had the neighbors calling the police. And now they're arguing again," Mia noted, reviewing the photos she'd taken. "Maybe she's threatening to expose him? Or demanding something." "Maybe," I said slowly. "Which means she might be willing to talk to me." Mia's eyes widened. "You want to approach her? Is that safe?" I wasn't sure, but I was running out of options. If Daniel had been violent with Amber, that changed everything. My divorce strategy, my moral calculations, even my own safety considerations. "I need to know what I'm dealing with," I said finally. "And she might be the only one who can tell me." Finding Amber proved easier than expected. Her full name, Amber Lawson, had been on some of the hotel receipts I'd found, and a quick social media search revealed she now worked at a boutique financial consulting firm in the city. According to her Instagram, she frequented a particular coffee shop near her office most mornings. Monday morning found me there at 7:30 a.m., nervously clutching a latte and watching the door. At 7:52, she walked in, tall, blonde, and younger looking in person than in photos. My stomach clenched at the sight of her, this woman who had been intimate with my husband in my home, in my bed. I forced myself to breathe normally as she ordered her drink and then, to my surprise, spotted me and froze. Our eyes locked across the coffee shop. She knew exactly who I was. I could see recognition and fear flash across her face. For a moment I thought she might bolt, but then she squared her shoulders and walked directly to my table. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, her voice surprisingly steady given her obvious anxiety. "I assume this isn't a coincidence." "It's not," I confirmed, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Would you sit? I think we should talk." She hesitated, then sank into the chair, setting her coffee on the table with a slightly trembling hand. "How did you find me?" "That's not important," I said. "What's important is that I know about you and Daniel, and I know something happened Friday night that had the neighbors calling the police." Her face paled visibly. "He told you about that?" "The police told me They came to the house Saturday morning after I returned early from my mother's. Oh God, she whispered, her composure cracking. What did Daniel say happened? He denied everything. Said there was no woman in the house, no argument, nothing. I leaned forward slightly. But we both know that's not true, don't we, Amber? She stared at her coffee cup, avoiding my eyes. Look, Mrs. Harrington. Emma, I interrupted. Under the circumstances, I think first names are appropriate. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Emma, I don't know what you want from me, but I'm not looking to cause trouble. Things with Daniel are complicated. They certainly looked complicated yesterday when you were arguing outside his office. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. You were watching us? I've been watching for weeks, I admitted, gathering evidence for my divorce lawyer. Something shifted in her expression then. Relief, perhaps? You're divorcing him? Of course I am. Did you think I knew about the affair and was fine with it? She shook her head quickly. No, She trailed off, seeming to gather her thoughts. He told me you were separated. Living together for appearances, but essentially over. He said you had an understanding. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that caused nearby patrons to glance our way. There was no understanding, Amber. No separation. Just a husband lying to his mistress about his wife, which I'm sure is chapter 1 in the adulterer's handbook. She flinched at the word mistress, but didn't dispute it. I should have known, she said quietly. There were signs, inconsistencies in his stories, but I wanted to believe him. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. I'm sorry. That probably means nothing to you, but I am. I wouldn't have. If I'd known for sure you were still really together. What happened Friday night? I asked, steering us back to my primary concern. Why were the neighbors calling about screaming? Amber's gaze dropped again, and she absently rubbed her wrist, the same wrist Daniel had grabbed in the photos from Sunday. We had an argument. It got heated. Did he hurt you? Her silence was answer enough. Amber, I said gently, I need to know what I'm dealing with. In 5 years of marriage, Daniel never laid a hand on me in anger. If that's changed, if he's become violent, I need to understand that for my own safety and for my divorce case. She took a shuddering breath. It wasn't premeditated. We were drinking. I found text messages on his phone, from you actually, about how much you were looking forward to the Cayman Islands trip he'd mentioned at lunch. Her laugh was hollow. He'd told me he was taking me to the Caymans next month. For my birthday. The duplicity was so absurd I might have laughed if the situation weren't so serious. And when you confronted him? He got defensive, said I was overreacting. We argued and I threatened to tell you everything. She rubbed her wrist again. He grabbed me hard, pushed me against the wall, said I needed to calm down, that I was being hysterical. A tear slipped down her cheek. I've never seen him like that. It scared me. I screamed, more from shock than pain, and that seemed to snap him out of it. He apologized immediately, was all contrition and promises it would never happen again. So you moved to the guest room, I surmised. She looked surprised. Yes. How did you know? The sheets. The missing throw blanket. I'm observant. I studied her face, noting the mixture of embarrassment and relief in her expression. And yesterday? What was that argument about? The police visit. He was furious, convinced I'd somehow engineered it to pressure him. I tried to explain that I hadn't called anyone, that a neighbor must have genuinely heard us, but he wouldn't believe me. She sighed. That's when I realized how deep I was in something unhealthy. I told him I needed space to think. He didn't take it well. We sat in silence for a moment, two women connected by the same deceitful man, processing our respective revelations. What are you going to do now? I finally asked. Amber shrugged, looking suddenly very young. Ended, obviously. I already started applying for jobs at firms in Boston and Chicago. Fresh start far away from here. She hesitated. What about you? You mentioned divorce. Yes, I confirmed. I'm building a case to ensure the prenuptial agreement's infidelity clause is triggered. Daniel's been very careful to protect his assets. She nodded slowly. That sounds like him. Always 3 steps ahead, always protecting his interests. She bit her lip, seeming to debate something internally, then reached for her purse. I have something that might help you. She withdrew her phone, tapped through several screens, then handed it to me. These are texts from Daniel from the past few months. Screenshots I took whenever something felt off or concerning. I was compiling them because I was starting to suspect he wasn't being honest with me about your relationship. I scrolled through dozens of messages in which Daniel explicitly discussed their affair, made plans for their future, and, most damning, complained about me and our marriage in ways that made it absolutely clear we were still very much together. I struggled to find words. I know, she said quietly. I'm not proud of my role in all this. But maybe the messages can help you get what you deserve in the divorce. I looked at her, really looked at her, trying to reconcile the homewrecker I'd imagined with this seemingly decent young woman who had also been deceived. Why are you helping me? She considered the question seriously. Because what he did to both of us was wrong. Because I was raised to believe that when you mess up, you try to make it right. And because, she touched her wrist again, I'm starting to think Daniel Harrington isn't who either of us thought he was. I nodded slowly. I'd like to forward these messages to myself, if that's okay. Go ahead. As I typed my email address into her phone, a new thought occurred to me. Amber, would you be willing to provide a statement to my lawyer about what happened Friday night? About the physical confrontation? She hesitated, fear flickering across her face. I don't know if I want to get involved in a legal battle with Daniel. He can be vindictive. I understand, I said, though disappointment coursed through me. Her testimony would have been powerful. But if you change your mind, I'll think about it, she promised, taking her phone back after I'd sent the messages. And Emma? For what it's worth, I think he's still in love with you. Everything was always about you, comparing me to you, talking about you, keeping your photos everywhere. I was just a distraction, a ego boost. It doesn't excuse anything, but I thought you should know. The statement hit me harder than expected, not because I cared about Daniel's feelings anymore, but because it highlighted the senselessness of it all. If he still loved me, why destroy what we had? If I wasn't enough, why not leave honorably? Thank you for meeting with me, I said, gathering my things. And Amber? Be careful. If Daniel becomes suspicious that we've talked. I know, she said grimly. Don't worry. By this time next week, I'll be gone. New city, new job, clean slate. We parted with an awkward but sincere handshake, two women united briefly by shared betrayal before continuing on divergent paths. That evening, Daniel returned home late, smelling of scotch and tension. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he kissed my cheek and asked about my day. I gave bland, mundane answers about my students and lesson plans, all while thinking of Amber's bruised wrist and the police report about screaming. In bed that night, as Daniel slept beside me, I made my final decision. Confronting him directly would be dangerous now that I knew he was capable of violence when cornered. The smartest path was to continue gathering evidence, finalize my strategy with Patricia, and then strike decisively when everything was in place. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in strategic patience. I maintained perfect normalcy with Daniel while secretly moving my most precious possessions, family heirlooms, irreplaceable photos, important documents, to a storage unit I'd rented under my maiden name. I transferred small amounts from our joint account to my personal account that Daniel didn't monitor, building a financial cushion. I forwarded Amber's text messages to Patricia, who was delighted with this new evidence. These are exactly what we needed, she confirmed during our next meeting. Combined with the photos, financial records, and phone records, we have an airtight case for triggering the infidelity clause. And the house? I asked, still fixated on the beautiful Hamptons property I'd poured my heart into. Patricia sighed. Still challenging, given the specific language in the prenup about real estate. Even with the infidelity clause, the house will likely remain his property. I nodded, disappointed but not surprised. I understand. Let's proceed with filing then. Actually, Patricia said, leaning forward slightly, I had a thought about the house. Given everything you've told me about Daniel's careful financial management and his offshore accounts, there might be another angle we could pursue. My interest piqued. What kind of angle? Financial disclosure in divorce proceedings is mandatory. If we can show that Daniel has been hiding assets or misrepresenting his financial situation, particularly if those hidden assets should have been considered marital property, it could potentially invalidate parts of the prenup. She tapped her pen thoughtfully. Has he ever mentioned anything about the original purchase of the house? Sources of funds? Anything unusual? I thought back, trying to recall conversations from 3 years ago when we'd bought the property. He always said he bought it with profits from a particularly successful investment. Something about medical technology stocks. And you never saw documentation? Closing statements? Anything with specific numbers? No, I admitted. Daniel handled all the financial aspects. I just chose finishes and fixtures and managed the renovation. Patricia nodded, unsurprised. Classic financial control tactic. Keep the spouse in the dark about money matters. She made a note in her file. I'm going to have my team do some deeper digging into the property records and the timing of that purchase. If there's anything irregular about how it was acquired, it might give us leverage for negotiation, if not in court. I left her office feeling cautiously optimistic. While the betrayal still ached, the prospect of fighting back, of securing my future despite Daniel's attempts to control it, gave me a sense of purpose that had been missing since I'd discovered the affair. That weekend, Daniel surprised me with theater tickets, a Broadway show I'd mentioned wanting to see months ago. The gesture might once have seemed thoughtful, but now I recognized it for what it was: manipulation. He'd been more attentive lately, perhaps sensing my emotional withdrawal despite my careful performance of normalcy. Expensive gifts, surprise dates, increased physical affection, all attempts to strengthen his hold over me, to reassure himself that his secret life remained secret. As we dressed for the theater, Daniel received a text that made his expression darken momentarily before he forced a smile. "Work," he explained, putting his phone away without responding. "Always something." But I'd glimpsed the message preview. Boston interview went well. Starting next week. Goodbye and good luck with everything. Amber, I realized. Telling Daniel she was leaving as promised. His tightened jaw and the tension in his shoulders told me he wasn't pleased with this development, but he said nothing more about it. During intermission, as Daniel went to get drinks, I remained in my seat, observing the crowd and reflecting on how surreal my life had become. Here I was, dressed elegantly, attending a prestigious Broadway show with my handsome, successful husband, the perfect picture of marital bliss. Yet underneath that facade lay betrayal, violence, and calculated plans for divorce. How many other couples in this theater were living similar lies? "Penny for your thoughts," Daniel said, returning with champagne flutes. "You look very serious for someone watching a comedy." I smiled, accepting the glass. Just thinking about appearances versus reality. How things aren't always what they seem. He gave me an odd look. "That's rather philosophical for a Saturday night. Teaching literature makes you think about these things," I said lightly. "All those stories about secret lives and hidden motives." Daniel laughed, but there was an edge to it. "Well, I prefer my reality straightforward and uncomplicated. What you see is what you get with me." The irony was so thick I could hardly breathe through it. I sipped my champagne to avoid responding directly, afraid my voice would betray the bitter amusement his statement provoked. The following Tuesday, Patricia called with unexpected news. "Emma, we found something interesting about the house purchase." The property was bought through a shell company that traces back to an LLC in the Cayman Islands. The timing coincides with a period when Daniel's investment firm was under SEC investigation for some questionable trading practices, nothing that resulted in charges, but enough to raise eyebrows. "What does that mean for us?" I asked, heart racing. "It means there's a possibility, and I stress just a possibility, that the house purchase involved funds Daniel was attempting to shield from regulatory scrutiny. If we can establish that, it could completely change the equation regarding the property division." She paused. "However, pursuing this would significantly escalate matters. It would become much more than a simple divorce. We'd essentially be threatening to expose potential financial improprieties." I considered this carefully. Would that be dangerous? Potentially, yes. Men like Daniel, who have much to lose, can become unpredictable when cornered. Before we pursue this angle, I need to know you're prepared for what might come. Aggressive legal countermeasures, personal attacks on your character, possibly worse. The memory of Amber's bruised wrist flashed in my mind. I understand the risks, but I also understand what I deserve after supporting Daniel for 5 years, after designing and managing the renovation of that house, after having my trust completely violated. I want to proceed. "Very well," Patricia said, her tone both approving and cautious. "In that case, I suggest we adjust our strategy. Rather than filing immediately, we prepare everything but hold it in reserve. Then we approach Daniel with a settlement offer, one that includes the house, and mention that we've discovered some concerning financial irregularities that we'd hate to have to include in public divorce filings." "You're suggesting we blackmail him?" I asked, surprised. "I prefer leverage negotiation," Patricia corrected smoothly. "We're simply making him aware of the potential consequences of not reaching an amicable settlement. It's his choice whether to agree to reasonable terms or risk exposure of his financial maneuvers." The plan was bold, potentially risky, but undeniably appealing. Let's do it, I decided. When? Give me 2 more days to compile everything. Then we'll schedule a meeting. Neutral territory, my office. You'll be present, but I'll do most of the talking. For the next 2 days, I moved through my life in a state of hyper-awareness, acutely conscious that everything was about to change irrevocably. I taught my classes, discussed Shakespearean betrayal themes with my seniors, made dinner with Daniel, and lay beside him at night, all while counting down the hours to our confrontation. Thursday morning, I left for work as usual, but texted Daniel mid-morning. Need to meet you at 2 p.m. Important. Address to follow. He responded immediately, concerned, asking what was wrong. I replied simply, nothing to discuss via text. See you at 2, and sent Patricia's office address. At 1:45, I sat in Patricia's office reviewing our strategy one final time. We had compiled a devastating dossier, evidence of Daniel's affair with Amber, financial records suggesting improprieties with the house purchase, and a draft divorce filing that would become public record, exposing every detail if we couldn't reach a settlement. At precisely 2 p.m., Daniel arrived, his expression shifting from concern to confusion when he saw the law office sign, then to dawning comprehension when the receptionist directed him to Patricia Winters, divorce attorney. When he entered the conference room and saw me seated beside Patricia, his face went through a remarkable series of transformations: shock, anger, calculation, and finally, a forced calm. Emma? What is this? He remained standing, briefcase clutched tightly in one hand. Please have a seat, Mr. Harrington, Patricia said professionally. I'm Patricia Winters, your wife's attorney. We have some matters to discuss that I believe will be in everyone's best interest to resolve amicably. Daniel did not sit. If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. Emma, what the hell is going on? I met his gaze steadily. I know about Amber, Daniel. I know about all of it. The affair, the weekends in our house, even the incident that had the neighbors calling the police. His face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. I don't know what you think you know, but this is ridiculous. If you had concerns, you should have talked to me directly, not ambushed me with a lawyer. Please, Mr. Harrington, Patricia interjected smoothly, histrionics won't help. We have extensive documentation. She opened a folder and began laying out photographs on the table, Daniel and Amber kissing outside his office, entering the Harborview Hotel together, leaving our house. Daniel stared at the images, his confident facade cracking. You had me followed? That's invasion of privacy. There's no expectation of privacy in public places, Patricia countered. Now, shall we discuss the terms of your divorce, or would you like to see the additional evidence we've compiled? The text messages, perhaps? The hotel receipts? The police report? Daniel finally sank into a chair, his expression hardening. This is harassment. This is consequences, I said quietly. For lying, for cheating, for making me believe in a future you were actively destroying. Something shifted in his eyes then, a calculation, a reassessment. Fine, you know about Amber. It was a mistake, a stupid midlife crisis or something. We can work through this, Emma. Couples counseling, a fresh start. We don't need lawyers. We're well beyond that point, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I'm not interested in reconciliation. Then what do you want? He demanded, anger finally breaking through. Money? Is that it? Because the prenup is pretty clear. About that? Patricia interrupted, opening another folder. We've discovered some concerning irregularities regarding the purchase of your Hamptons property. Specifically, the routing of funds through a Cayman Islands LLC during a period when your firm was under SEC investigation. Daniel went completely still. What are you implying? We're not implying anything, Patricia said mildly. We're simply noting that if we can't reach an amicable settlement, our divorce filing will necessarily include all financial details we've uncovered. Such filings, of course, become public record. The threat hung in the air between us. Daniel's gaze darted between Patricia and me, reassessing, calculating new odds. What do you want? He finally asked, his voice flat. Patricia pushed a document across the table. Our proposed settlement terms. They're quite reasonable given the circumstances. Daniel scanned the document, his jaw tightening. The house? You expect me to give you the house? Among other considerations, yes, Patricia confirmed. Ms. Harrington has substantial sweat equity in that property, having designed and managed its renovation. Moreover, given the questionable nature of its purchase, we believe a court would look favorably on her claim. This is blackmail, he hissed. This is negotiation, Patricia corrected. You're free to reject these terms and proceed with a contentious public divorce. We're simply offering an alternative that would be less damaging to your reputation and professional standing. Daniel turned to me, ignoring Patricia completely. Is this really what you want, Emma? To extort me? To threaten me with exposure? After 5 years together? I met his gaze without flinching. What I wanted was a faithful husband who honored his promises. What I wanted was the future we planned together. Since I can't have those things, yes, I want what's fair. The house I poured my heart into, financial stability, and a clean break. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, I know exactly what I'm doing, I countered. For the first time in our relationship, I'm the one 3 steps ahead, Daniel. I'm the one protecting my interests. I learned from the best. He stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. Then, without another word, he gathered his briefcase and stood. I'll have my lawyer review this and respond within 3 days. That would be acceptable, Patricia agreed. We'll await your response. After Daniel left, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That went about as expected. Patricia nodded. He'll fight initially, men like him always do. But once his lawyer explains the implications of what we've uncovered about the house purchase, I expect he'll come around to our terms. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. The next 3 days were surreal. Daniel didn't come home that night, or the next. He texted only to say he was staying at a hotel to give us both space to think. I moved through our empty house like a ghost, touching familiar objects that no longer felt like they belonged to the life I'd known. I slept in the guest room, unable to face our marital bed. On the 3rd day, Patricia called. We've received a counteroffer from Daniel's attorney. He's willing to give you the house, but is pushing back on some of the financial terms. My heart leapt. He's giving up the house? It appears your instincts were correct. There's something about that purchase he doesn't want scrutinized too closely. She sounded pleased. Now we negotiate the rest of the package. This might take a few rounds, but we're starting from a position of strength. That evening, Daniel finally returned home. He found me in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner for one. We regarded each other silently for a moment, strangers in a shared space that had once been a home. My lawyer says I'm being paranoid, he finally said, setting his keys on the counter. He says your evidence about the house is circumstantial at best, that the SEC would never reopen an investigation based on divorce filings. I continued chopping vegetables, not responding. But he doesn't know what I know. Daniel continued. He doesn't understand how career-ending even the suggestion of impropriety can be in my field. How clients flee at the first whiff of scandal. He leaned against the counter, watching me. You've played this well, Emma. I underestimated you. You did, I agreed, finally meeting his gaze. But it wasn't a game to me. A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed his features. For what it's worth, I did love you. Do love you in my way. Your way isn't good enough, I said simply. It never was. I just didn't see it until now. He nodded slowly. I'm accepting most of your terms. The house is yours. The financial settlement is acceptable. With some adjustments my lawyer will communicate to Patricia. Relief and vindication washed over me in equal measure, but I kept my expression neutral. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said, a hard edge entering his voice. This isn't generosity. This is me cutting my losses. But remember, Emma, you're not the only one who can play hardball. You've won this battle, but be careful about the war. The veiled threat sent a chill through me, but I refused to show fear. Is that all? He studied me for a long moment, as if memorizing my features. I'll pack some things and stay at the city apartment until the paperwork is finalized. My lawyer estimates 2 to 3 weeks, assuming yours accepts our counteroffer. Fine, I said, returning to my vegetables. Take whatever you need. He hesitated, perhaps expecting more emotion, more drama. When none came, he simply nodded and went upstairs. An hour later, he left with several suitcases and didn't look back. The next morning, Saturday, I woke early and did something I hadn't done in weeks. I walked through the entire house slowly, reacquainting myself with every room, every feature I'd lovingly selected. This beautiful space that had been the canvas for my dreams of family and future was now truly mine, or would be, once the paperwork was finalized. Standing in the sunlit kitchen, I realized something had shifted inside me. The hollow ache of betrayal remained, but alongside it grew something new, a quiet pride in my own strength, my own resilience. I had faced the destruction of my marriage and emerged not just surviving, but victorious. I picked up my phone and called Mia. It's happening, I told her when she answered. Daniel's agreed to the settlement. The house is mine. Her whoop of celebration made me smile. I knew you'd nail him. What's next? Bonfire of his possessions? Repainting every room? Converting his precious man cave into a feminine utopia? I laughed, the sound surprising me with its genuineness. Actually, I was thinking champagne brunch. Can you come over? I'm already putting on shoes, she promised. And Emma? I'm so fucking proud of you. After we disconnected, I stood in the peaceful morning light of what was now my kitchen, in what would soon be legally my house, and allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated satisfaction. Daniel had promised me forever together, then betrayed that promise in the most painful way possible. Now I had his $1 million house, a substantial financial settlement, and something even more valuable, my freedom. The journey wasn't over. Paperwork remained, legalities to navigate, a life to rebuild. But for the first time since discovering those devastating text messages, I felt certain that what lay ahead was not just survival, but potentially something better than what I'd lost. Forever together had been a lie, but forever mine? That had a rather nice ring to it. The first 2 weeks after Daniel moved out, the house felt impossibly large. I wandered through rooms that now echoed with my solitary footsteps, touching surfaces that still held the ghost of our shared life. Despite my victory, I found myself struggling with an unexpected emptiness. It wasn't longing for Daniel. That ship had sailed the moment I'd seen those text messages, but rather mourning for the future I'd once believed in. The divorce paperwork moved forward with surprising efficiency. Daniel, ever the pragmatist, had decided to cut his losses quickly rather than engage in a protracted battle that might expose his financial irregularities. Patricia called with updates almost daily, her tone becoming increasingly pleased as negotiations progressed in my favor. He's agreed to the revised financial terms, she informed me on a particularly gray Tuesday morning. You'll receive the lump sum we discussed, plus the increased alimony for 3 years. The house transfer is already in process. He's not fighting anymore? I asked, suspicious of anything coming too easily where Daniel was concerned. Patricia's laugh crackled through the phone. Oh, he's fighting. His lawyer is making appropriately aggressive noises about your extortion tactics, but it's all theater. The paperwork keeps moving forward. I thanked her and hung up, relieved but unsettled. Daniel's final comment about playing hardball and winning the war had lodged in my mind like a splinter, impossible to ignore. He wasn't a man who accepted defeat gracefully. Something was coming. I just didn't know what form it would take. That evening, as if summoned by my unease, Daniel called. I stared at his name on my phone screen, debating whether to answer before finally accepting the call. Emma, his voice was carefully neutral. We need to schedule a time for me to collect the rest of my personal items. My lawyer suggested having it witnessed to avoid any misunderstandings. Fine, I replied, matching his businesslike tone. When were you thinking? This weekend? Saturday morning, perhaps? I'll bring my attorney as witness. You can have Patricia there if you prefer. I agreed to the arrangement, then added, For what it's worth, Daniel, I haven't touched your things. I'm not that petty. There was a pause. No, you're certainly not petty, he finally said, something unreadable in his voice. You're calculated. Strategic. I taught you well, it seems. You didn't teach me anything. I corrected him. You just showed me what I'm capable of when pushed. Another pause. Yes, well, Saturday then. 10 o'clock? After he hung up, I stood in the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where he'd once lifted me onto the counter and kissed me in celebration of his first major investment deal, and I felt nothing. No pain, no anger, no regret. Just a cool emptiness where emotion should be. It was progress, I supposed, but it wasn't quite healing. Saturday arrived with brilliant autumn sunshine that belied my inner tension. Patricia arrived early, bringing coffee and a reassuring professional presence. Remember, she advised as we waited, minimal interaction. Let the lawyers handle any disputes. Don't rise to any provocations. I'm not worried about keeping my cool, I assured her. That's not the problem. She raised an eyebrow. Then what is? I don't know yet, I admitted. But Daniel doesn't lose gracefully. He's planning something. At precisely 10 o'clock, Daniel arrived with a man I assumed was his attorney and 2 moving assistants. His expression when he entered the house was carefully blank, but I caught the subtle tightening around his eyes as he surveyed the space. His space, in his mind, regardless of what legal documents might now say. Emma? He nodded curtly. Patricia. This is Maxwell Hedges, my attorney. Introductions were exchanged with frigid politeness, and then Daniel led his moving team upstairs to begin collecting his clothes, personal items, and the few pieces of furniture we'd agreed were exclusively his. Patricia and Maxwell followed to observe, leaving me alone in the living room, listening to footsteps and muffled conversation overhead. I wandered into the kitchen, needing distance from the sounds of my marriage being physically dismantled. Through the window, I could see Daniel's sleek black Mercedes in the driveway beside a rented moving truck. The sight triggered a memory. Daniel driving us to view this house for the first time, his boyish excitement as he described his vision for our future here. Had any of it been real? Or had he always been performing, playing the role of devoted husband while keeping his true self hidden? The sound of footsteps on the stairs drew me back to the present. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking oddly hesitant. The team is handling the bedroom and office, he said. I wanted to, he gestured vaguely around the kitchen, check if there was anything in here. I stepped aside, giving him access to the space. Take whatever you want from the kitchen. I know how attached you are to your espresso machine. He moved to the built-in coffee station he'd insisted on during renovations, a professional-grade setup that I'd joked cost more than my first car. As he unplugged the complicated machine, his movements were precise, efficient, like everything he did. You could have destroyed my things, he said suddenly, not looking at me. Burned my clothes, broken my collectibles. Most people would have? I'm not most people. No, he agreed, finally meeting my eyes. You're not. That's why I married you. The statement hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us was willing to unpack. I turned away, unwilling to be drawn into whatever game he was playing. Your lawyer seems competent, I said, changing the subject. You made a good choice. A humorless smile touched his lips. High praise from the woman who outmaneuvered me so thoroughly. Is that what you think happened? I outmaneuvered you? I couldn't help the edge that crept into my voice. This wasn't a corporate takeover, Daniel. This was our marriage. Our life? You're the one who treated it like a game you could cheat at. Something flickered in his eyes. Anger? Regret? But was quickly suppressed. Always the idealist, he said softly. It's why we balanced each other so well. You saw the world as it should be. I saw it as it is. And how is it? I asked, genuinely curious about his worldview despite myself. Transactional, he replied without hesitation. Everything, love, loyalty, success, it's all just different forms of currency, different things we trade for what we want. The stark emptiness of his philosophy should have shocked me, but instead it clarified so much about our relationship. And what was I in this transaction? What currency did I represent? His expression softened fractionally. You were supposed to be the exception, he admitted, the one thing I wouldn't reduce to a transaction. But old habits, he shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. Before I could respond, Maxwell appeared in the doorway. Daniel, we should discuss the items in the safe. The moment shattered. Daniel's expression shifted back to neutral as he nodded to his attorney. Of course. He turned to me, professional distance restored. We'll need the combination. I provided it without argument, watching them disappear toward Daniel's office where the wall safe was hidden behind a false panel. Patricia descended the stairs moments later, looking satisfied. Everything's proceeding smoothly, she reported. They're being quite reasonable about the division. He's being reasonable because he has a plan, I murmured, more to myself than to her. He's just waiting for the right moment. Patricia studied me with concern. Emma, sometimes a clean resolution is just that, clean. Not everything is a hidden agenda. I wanted to believe her, but 5 years with Daniel had taught me to recognize the calm before his strategic strikes. He moved through the world like a chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. This cooperative, reasonable facade was just another positioning of pieces. The removal of Daniel's possessions continued efficiently through the morning. By noon, the moving truck was loaded with his clothing, personal effects, and the few furniture pieces he'd claimed. Patricia and Maxwell exchanged cordial farewells, having successfully navigated the potential minefield of the day. As Daniel prepared to leave, he paused at the front door, looking back at the house, at me, with an unreadable expression. The final paperwork should be ready to sign next week, he said. After that, it's all yours. It already is, I replied quietly. He nodded, a small, tight movement. Goodbye, Emma. Goodbye, Daniel. I watched from the doorway as he drove away, the moving truck following behind, carrying away the physical remnants of our shared life. Only when both vehicles had disappeared down the tree-lined drive did I finally close the door and lean against it, exhaling a breath that felt like I'd been holding it for months. Patricia touched my arm gently. "You did well," she said. "One more meeting to sign the final papers, and this chapter closes completely." I nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's exit had been too smooth, too uncomplicated. "He's planning something," I repeated. Patricia sighed. "Emma, I understand your suspicion, but from a legal standpoint, he's fulfilled all requirements. The house transfer is already filed. The financial settlement is agreed upon. There's little he could do at this point without violating the agreement and potentially exposing himself to the very scrutiny he's trying to avoid." I wanted to explain that Daniel operated outside the boundaries of conventional thinking, that he would find an angle I hadn't considered, but I could see Patricia's patience with my paranoia was wearing thin. So I simply thanked her for her support and showed her out. Alone in my house, truly my house now, I began the process of reclaiming the space. I moved through each room slowly, making mental notes of what I wanted to change, what no longer belonged in my new life. Daniel had taken his personal items, but his presence remained in 1,000 subtle ways. The specific arrangement of books on shelves, the pretentious artwork he'd insisted on displaying, the color scheme in the master bedroom that I'd never particularly liked, but had accepted as a compromise. Change would have to start somewhere. I began in the bedroom, stripping the king-sized bed of its expensive linens and depositing them in a donation pile. The mattress would have to go too. I couldn't sleep another night on the surface where he'd betrayed me with Amber. I worked methodically through the evening, creating piles for donation, disposal, and keeping, slowly exorcising Daniel's ghost from the house. By midnight, exhausted but satisfied, I settled onto the couch with a glass of wine, surveying my progress. The master bedroom stood nearly empty now, just the bare mattress and frame remaining until I could arrange for their removal. Daniel's closet gaped empty, his nightstand drawers cleared. In the master bathroom, I'd removed every product he'd used, every towel his body had touched. Tomorrow I would continue the purge, moving through the living spaces, reclaiming territory room by room. But for tonight, this was enough, the symbolic cleansing of the most intimate space we'd shared. I slept on the guest room bed, wrapped in fresh sheets that had never known Daniel's touch, and for the first time since discovering his betrayal, I didn't dream of him. The final signing of divorce papers took place the following Thursday in Patricia's office. Daniel arrived with Maxwell, his expression professionally neutral as he greeted me with a curt nod. We sat at opposite ends of Patricia's conference table, the thick stack of documents between us like a physical manifestation of our division. The process was anticlimactic, just the mechanical scratching of pens on paper, initials here, full signatures there, the occasional murmur of instruction from the attorneys. No drama, no last-minute revelations or arguments, just the bureaucratic dissolution of 5 years together, reduced to legal language and asset division. As we reached the final documents, I felt Patricia stiffen slightly beside me. I glanced up to find Daniel watching me with an unsettling intensity, something like satisfaction flickering in his eyes. "Is something wrong?" I asked Patricia quietly. She shook her head minutely, but her brow remained furrowed as she examined the page before her more carefully. "This clause wasn't in our last draft," she said to Maxwell. "The non-disclosure agreement regarding the financial terms." Maxwell nodded smoothly. "A standard addition to protect both parties' privacy. Nothing controversial, just prevents either party from discussing the financial settlement publicly." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "My client and I need a moment to review this addition." We stepped outside the conference room, and Patricia immediately pulled out her phone, bringing up the previous draft to compare. "The language is broader than Maxwell suggested," she explained, highlighting sections on her screen. "It's not just about financial terms. It would prevent you from discussing any aspect of the divorce or what led to it. Essentially, you couldn't publicly talk about Daniel's infidelity or any of his actions." Understanding dawned. This was Daniel's move, the strategy he'd been withholding. He was buying my silence along with the quick settlement. "Can he do this?" I asked. "Add new terms at the final signing?" "We can refuse to accept the addition," Patricia said. "But that would delay completion, potentially reopening negotiations." She hesitated. "Given how favorable the settlement is for you otherwise, I would normally advise accepting it." The NDA doesn't prevent you from privately discussing the divorce with friends or family, just from making public statements. I thought of the veiled threat in Daniel's parting words weeks ago. You've won this battle, but be careful about the war. This was what he'd meant. He was ensuring that even in defeat, he controlled the narrative. I could have his house, his money, but not the ability to tell my story or damage his carefully cultivated public image. He's protecting his reputation, I realized aloud, making sure I can't harm his business by revealing the affair or his financial maneuvers. Patricia nodded. Most likely. The question is whether this matters enough to you to potentially jeopardize the settlement. I considered it carefully. The NDA would prevent me from publicly exposing Daniel's betrayal, but did I even want to? The thought of airing our private pain in some public forum held no appeal. I wasn't interested in vengeance by humiliation. I wanted justice, closure, and the freedom to rebuild, all of which the settlement provided. I'll sign it, I decided. Let him have his public facade. I know the truth and so does he. That's enough for me. When we returned to the conference room, Daniel's expression betrayed a flicker of surprise at my easy capitulation. He'd expected resistance, perhaps even hoped for it, a chance to renegotiate terms if I refused his addition. Instead, I signed the NDA without comment, denying him the satisfaction of seeing me struggle with the decision. With the final signatures in place, it was done. 5 years of marriage, dissolved in a morning of paperwork. Daniel and Maxwell departed first, leaving Patricia and me to gather our copies of the documents. Congratulations, Patricia said, handing me a thick folder. You are officially divorced, significantly wealthier, and the sole owner of a magnificent Hamptons property. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt strangely hollowed out, as if the finality of the signatures had carved something essential from my chest. Not love for Daniel, that had died with his betrayal, but perhaps the last vestiges of the woman I'd been when I married him, trusting, optimistic, certain of my place in the world. Thank you, Patricia, I said, taking the folder. For everything. She squeezed my shoulder gently. Take some time to process. This is a major life transition, even when it's what you wanted. Her expression softened. And Emma? Don't let his final play with the NDA diminish your victory. You walked away with far more than most in your position. I nodded, summoning a smile I didn't entirely feel. I know. I won. The words tasted flat on my tongue, the victory somehow less satisfying than I'd imagined. That evening, alone in my house, legally, officially, unquestionably mine now, I opened a bottle of expensive champagne Daniel had been saving for some special occasion. I poured a single glass and carried it out to the back terrace, where the autumn sunset painted the manicured grounds in shades of gold and amber. I raised my glass to the emptiness before me. To new beginnings, I said aloud, my voice sounding small in the vast space. As I sipped the champagne, I realized I had no idea what those new beginnings would look like. For so long, my energy had been focused on survival, then on securing what was rightfully mine in the divorce. Now that those battles were won, I faced the more nebulous challenge of building a life from the rubble of my plans. The following Monday, I returned to teaching with a renewed focus. My students noticed the change immediately, the absence of my engagement and wedding rings, the new intensity with which I approached our literary discussions. The senior girls in my AP Literature class exchanged meaningful glances when I announced we'd be studying betrayal themes in Gatsby and Othello, but none dared ask directly about my obvious life changes. After classes ended, I found myself lingering in my classroom, reluctant to return to the empty house. The school hallways gradually quieted as students and faculty departed, leaving me alone with stacks of essays and my thoughts. A gentle knock at my open door startled me. Luke Collins, the new history teacher who'd joined the faculty that fall, stood in the doorway, his expression apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, his slight Boston accent softening the words. "I was wondering if you had a copy of that project rubric you mentioned in the department meeting. The interdisciplinary one?" "Of course," I replied, grateful for the distraction. I searched through my files, acutely aware of Luke's presence. We'd spoken casually at faculty gatherings, but I knew little about him beyond his reputation as an engaging teacher and the fact that he'd moved from Boston after divorcing. Divorce was something we had in common now, I supposed. "Here it is," I said, holding out the document. It worked well for my collaboration with the history department last year. The students were surprisingly invested in analyzing primary sources alongside literary texts from the same period. Luke took the papers, his fingers briefly brushing mine. "Thanks, this looks perfect." He hesitated, shifting his weight slightly. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask if you'd consider collaborating on something similar this semester. My juniors are studying the civil rights movement, and I know your American Lit class covers some of the same ground." The invitation to collaboration was professional, appropriate, yet something in his tone, a careful warmth, suggested an interest beyond curriculum development. Or perhaps I was simply out of practice at reading normal human interaction after months of analyzing Daniel's deceptions. "That could work," I agreed. "We could align our units on Baldwin and civil rights literature." Luke smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that struck me as refreshingly genuine. "Great. Maybe we could discuss it further over coffee sometime this week." I hesitated, the invitation hovering in a gray area between collegiality and something more. Luke must have sensed my uncertainty. "Just professional curriculum planning," he clarified quickly. "Though I should probably mention that I've heard rumors about your situation. If timing is bad, I completely understand." So word had spread among the faculty about my divorce. Of course it had. Private schools were gossip ecosystems as robust as any small town. Coffee would be fine, I decided. "Professional coffee." His smile widened slightly. "Professional coffee it is. Thursday after last period?" I agreed, and Luke departed with the rubric and a wave that seemed just a fraction more energetic than strictly necessary. After he'd gone, I sat at my desk, processing the brief interaction with a mixture of surprise and mild amusement. Had I just been subtly asked out by a colleague? And had I actually agreed? The notion seemed absurd. I was barely 2 weeks divorced, still sleeping in my guest room because I couldn't face buying a new bed for the master bedroom yet. The last thing I needed was romantic complications. Yet, as I drove home that evening, I found myself thinking about Luke's easy smile and direct gaze, so different from Daniel's calculated charm. It wasn't attraction I felt. I wasn't sure I remembered what that felt like anymore, but perhaps a faint stirring of curiosity, a reminder that the world contained possibilities beyond the wreckage of my marriage. Thursday's professional coffee proved surprisingly enjoyable. Luke was intelligent, thoughtful about pedagogy, and refreshingly straightforward in his communication. We developed a solid plan for our curriculum collaboration, sharing resources and building a joint timeline that would allow our students to make meaningful connections between historical events and literary responses. As our meeting wound down, Luke leaned back in his chair, studying me with a thoughtfulness that made me both self-conscious and intrigued. "Can I ask you something completely unrelated to teaching?" he said finally. I tensed slightly but nodded. "How are you really doing with all of this? The divorce, I mean." His tone was gentle, free of the morbid curiosity that often accompanied such questions. Mine was finalized about 18 months ago, and I remember how surreal that period felt. The unexpected shift to personal territory caught me off guard. I'd become so accustomed to deflecting concerned inquiries from Mia and my mother with reassurances that I was fine, that my automatic response rose to my lips. "I'm managing," I said instead, opting for honesty. "It's strange. Some days I feel like I'm finally free, and others?" I trailed off, unsure how to articulate the hollow ache that still occasionally ambushed me. "Others, you wonder if you're actually going crazy," Luke supplied with a rueful smile. "At least that's how it was for me. One minute I'd be celebrating never having to argue about holiday plans with her family again, and the next I'd be crying in the cereal aisle because I automatically reached for her favorite brand." The description was so accurate, so precisely what I'd experienced, that I laughed despite myself. Yes, exactly that. Last week I caught myself buying his preferred coffee before remembering I don't even like it. Luke nodded understanding. The muscle memory of marriage takes time to fade. For what it's worth, it does get easier. Not in a linear way, more like waves that gradually lose power. "How long were you married?" I asked, realizing I knew almost nothing about his previous life. 7 years. He replied. "College sweethearts? Grew apart, wanted different things." He shrugged. No dramatic betrayal, just the slow realization we'd become strangers sharing an apartment. Something in my expression must have revealed that my experience had been different, because he winced slightly. "Sorry, I heard rumors about circumstances." I didn't mean to minimize. "You didn't," I assured him. "Every ending has its own pain." I hesitated, then added, "Mine involved discovering text messages. Another woman." Multiple women, actually. Luke's expression darkened. I'm sorry. There's no excuse for that kind of betrayal. The simple validation in his response loosened something tight in my chest. Unlike my mother, who had suggested working through it, or even Mia, whose righteous anger sometimes overwhelmed my own complex emotions, Luke simply acknowledged the wrongness without trying to fix or inflame it. Thank you, I said quietly, for not saying I should have seen it coming or asking if I'd somehow caused it by working too much or not being attentive enough. His eyebrows rose. People actually suggested that? Not directly, I admitted. But there were implications. Questions about whether I'd let myself go or been neglecting his needs. Jesus, Luke muttered. I don't even have words for how messed up that is. A brief, comfortable silence fell between us as I finished my coffee. Luke glanced at his watch reluctantly. I should go. I promised to call my sister before her night shift starts. He gathered his materials, then hesitated. This was nice. The curriculum planning and the other stuff too. Would you want to do it again sometime? The talking part, I mean. No pressure, it helps, having someone who understands the divorce terrain. The offer was presented so simply, without agenda or expectation, that I found myself nodding before fully considering it. I'd like that. The talking part. Luke's smile was warm as he stood to leave. Great. I'll see you tomorrow at school then. After he left, I remained at the coffee shop, nursing the dregs of my drink and examining my reactions. The conversation had been unexpectedly comfortable, the recognition of shared experience soothing in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't romance or even friendship yet, just the tentative connection of two people who had walked similar difficult paths. For the first time since the divorce had finalized, I felt a whisper of something like hope. Not for reconciliation with Daniel or even for new love, but simply for the possibility that life contained more than the pain of endings. That perhaps beginnings were still possible, even if their shape remained unclear. Over the next few weeks, my focus shifted from the trauma of divorce to the practical challenges of rebuilding. I finally purchased a new mattress for the master bedroom, ceremoniously discarding the old one and reclaiming the space as exclusively mine. I repainted rooms in colors Daniel had vetoed, rearranged furniture to suit my preferences alone, and slowly transformed the house into a reflection of my tastes rather than compromises. My professional relationship with Luke deepened into a genuine friendship. Our curriculum collaboration proved successful, leading to engaged student discussions and thoughtful projects. We fell into a routine of Friday afternoon coffee sessions, ostensibly to plan the following week's lessons, but increasingly devoted to personal conversations that ranged from books we'd loved to our respective divorce journeys. In Luke, I found something I hadn't realized I needed: a neutral sounding board who understood the specific disorientation of marital dissolution without being entangled in my history with Daniel. Unlike Mia, who had always harbored suspicions about my ex-husband, or my mother, who still occasionally suggested reconciliation might be possible, Luke had no investment in how I processed my experiences. His presence offered a refreshing absence of judgment or agenda. As October faded into November, bringing with it the first sharp chill of approaching winter, I felt myself gradually thawing from the emotional deep freeze that had protected me through the worst of the divorce. I began accepting social invitations again: dinner with Mia and her new boyfriend, faculty gatherings at school, even a weekend visit to my mother's home that didn't devolve into tense discussions about my failed marriage. Life was acquiring a new rhythm, different from what I'd planned but increasingly comfortable in its own way, which is precisely when Daniel decided to reappear. It happened on a crisp Saturday morning in early November. I was in the garden, preparing the flower beds for winter and enjoying the meditative quality of the work, when the sound of tires on gravel announced an unexpected visitor. I straightened, brushing soil from my gardening gloves, as a familiar black Mercedes pulled into the circular drive. My heart performed a complicated maneuver. Not quite fear, not quite anger, something more like wary resignation. Of course he would return eventually. I'd been naive to think our story had concluded so neatly. Daniel emerged from the car looking much as he always had, impeccably dressed in casual weekend luxury, his expression composed and unreadable. He spotted me in the garden and approached with measured steps, stopping at a respectful distance. "Emma," he greeted me, his tone carefully neutral. "You look well." I remained where I was, unwilling to close the distance between us. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" The divorce is final. The property transfer is complete. There's nothing left to discuss. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I'm not here to cause problems. I realized after I left that my grandmother's ring was still in the safe. The small sapphire, not your engagement ring. It's a family piece I'd like to keep. The explanation was reasonable, plausible even, but suspicion crept up my spine nonetheless. You could have called, or had your lawyer contact Patricia. I was driving out to meet clients in East Hampton anyway, he said with a small shrug. Seemed simpler to stop myself. He glanced around at the garden, noting the changes I'd made. You've been busy. The new arrangement suits the space better. I ignored the compliment, unwilling to be drawn into friendly conversation. I'll get the ring. Wait here. I turned toward the house, hyper-aware of his presence behind me, my body tense as if expecting a blow. Inside, I washed my hands quickly in the kitchen sink, trying to calm my racing pulse. It was just Daniel, just a brief interaction to return an overlooked item. Nothing to fear. Yet fear clung to me as I climbed the stairs to his former office, where the wall safe remained. I hadn't changed the combination, hadn't even opened it since our divorce, having no need for the various documents and valuables stored inside. Now I spun the dial with practiced movements, the soft click of the mechanism releasing oddly loud in the empty room. The sapphire ring was exactly where it had always been, nestled in a small velvet box in the back corner of the safe. I removed it and closed the safe again, then paused, taking a deep breath before heading back downstairs. This was the first time I'd seen Daniel since our divorce had finalized, the first test of my emotional fortitude in his presence. When I returned to the garden, Daniel had moved to the stone bench near the rose bushes, my rose bushes now, which I'd pruned into a completely different shape than he'd preferred. He stood as I approached, his expression still carefully neutral. Here, I said, holding out the ring box without ceremony. He took it, his fingers carefully avoiding contact with mine. Thank you. An awkward silence fell. By all logic, this should have been the end of our interaction. He had what he'd come for. There was no reason to prolong the moment. Yet he remained standing there, studying me with an intensity that made me acutely aware of my gardening clothes and disheveled hair. Was there something else? I finally asked, impatience edging my tone. Daniel slipped the ring box into his pocket. You've changed, he observed. Not just the house or garden. You. I crossed my arms defensively. Divorce tends to have that effect. It suits you, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. This new confidence. It's what attracted me to you initially, you know. That quiet certainty you had about yourself before. Before you systematically undermined it, I supplied, the words sharper than I'd intended. He accepted the blow with a slight nod. I deserved that. What do you want, Daniel? You didn't drive all the way out here just for a ring you've never worn and barely mentioned in 5 years? A flicker of his old smile appeared, there and gone like summer lightning. Perceptive as always, he hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. I wanted to see how you were doing. To make sure you were all right? The concern seemed so incongruous coming from the man who had betrayed me thoroughly that I laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Now you care about my well-being? That's rich. I always cared, he said quietly. In my way? Your way? I repeated. Right. Your way of caring involved sleeping with other women in our bed and lying to my face for months. He didn't flinch from the accusation. I made mistakes. Serious ones. I'm not here to minimize that or ask forgiveness. Then why are you here? Really? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of genuine discomfort I'd seen perhaps 3 times in our entire relationship. I'm selling the firm, he said abruptly. Moving to London. Fresh start. The announcement landed like a stone in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. Daniel leaving New York meant never having to worry about awkward encounters at social functions or restaurants. It meant true closure, a complete severing of our shared past. Congratulations, I said, unsure what response he was seeking. London is a good market for your work. It is, he agreed, but it means selling the apartment in the city, liquidating certain assets. He paused, including some joint investments that weren't explicitly covered in the divorce settlement. And there it was. The real purpose of this unexpected visit. Not concern for my well-being or sentimentality about family jewelry, but money, of course. What investments? I asked cautiously. The Arts Foundation? He replied. The one we established in both our names for tax purposes. It's technically a separate entity from my personal assets, so it wasn't included in the division. I need your signature to dissolve it and distribute the funds. The foundation had been Daniel's idea, a small charitable organization that sponsored arts education in underfunded schools. I'd been genuinely proud of the work it had done, even if the initial motivation had been tax efficiency rather than pure philanthropy. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "Just under $2 million, he said. "Split evenly, about $900,000 each after dissolution costs. Nearly $1 million. On top of the already substantial settlement I'd received. The sum was significant enough to catch my breath, yet Daniel had mentioned it with casual disregard, as if discussing lunch options. "I'll need to consult Patricia," I said automatically. "Of course." He nodded. "I've already had the paperwork drawn up. Maxwell can send it to her for review?" He reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a business card. "My new contact information for when you've made a decision." I took the card reflexively, noting the London address and international phone number. "You're really leaving?" "Next month," he confirmed. "The sale finalizes December 15th. I should have felt only relief at the prospect of Daniel's permanent departure from my life. Instead, I experienced a complicated tangle of emotions. Relief, yes, but also a strange sense of loss. Not for the man himself, but for the final severance of the life I had once believed in so completely. "Well," I said, striving for neutrality, "I wish you success in London." Daniel studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You know what's ironic, Emma? You won. Completely. You got the house, a substantial settlement, and now you'll get half the foundation. You outplayed me at every turn." A rueful smile touched his lips. "And somehow, seeing you now, I think you also got the better end emotionally. You seem whole, rebuilding, while I'm running away to another country." The observation startled me, partly because it rang true, but mostly because it revealed a self-awareness I'd never associated with Daniel. He had always been so confident, so certain of his decisions and actions. This hint of regret, of recognition that he'd lost something valuable, felt disconcertingly human. "It didn't have to be a game," I said quietly. "That was your choice." He nodded slowly. "Yes, it was." He glanced at his watch. "I should go. My clients are expecting me." He took a step back, creating more distance between us. "Take care of yourself, Emma." "You too, Daniel," I replied, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. I watched him walk back to his car, his posture perfect as always, betraying nothing of whatever emotions might be churning beneath his composed exterior. Only when he'd disappeared down the drive did I realize I was still clutching his business card, the edges slightly crumpled from my tight grip. I studied the embossed lettering, Daniel Harrington, with a new company name and the London address. Physical evidence that he was truly leaving, that this unexpected epilogue to our marriage was itself ending. I slipped the card into my pocket and returned to my gardening, my movements methodical as I processed the encounter. In some ways, seeing Daniel had been easier than I'd feared. The pain was there, but muted, like pressing on a bruise that had begun to heal. His reveal about the foundation felt anticlimactic, just another business transaction, not the emotional trap I'd half expected. That evening I called Patricia to inform her about the foundation dissolution. She was unsurprised by Daniel's approach. "The foundation is indeed separate from the assets covered in the divorce," she confirmed after consulting her files. "If he's selling the firm and leaving the country, dissolving it makes practical sense. I'll review the paperwork when it arrives, but it sounds straightforward and quite favorable for you." "It does," I agreed. "Almost too favorable. Equal distribution despite the fact that it was primarily his money that established it." Patricia made a thoughtful noise. "Perhaps this is his version of amends? A financial mea culpa?" "Perhaps," I said, unconvinced. Daniel's moral calculations had always centered on his own interests. If he was offering an even split, it benefited him somehow. Perhaps in tax implications I didn't understand, or in expediting his move to London. "In any case," Patricia continued, "I'll scrutinize everything before you sign. But assuming it's legitimate, this would be a significant addition to your financial security." After we disconnected, I wandered through my house, my definitively, permanently mine house, considering what an additional $1 million would mean for my future. I'd already achieved financial stability through the divorce settlement. This windfall would represent something more: freedom. The ability to take a sabbatical from teaching if I wanted, to travel extensively, to renovate the house completely to my specifications. Yet as I settled into bed that night, it wasn't the money that occupied my thoughts, but Daniel's parting observation: You seem whole, rebuilding. While I'm running away? Was he right? Was I healing while he floundered? The idea should have been satisfying, karmic justice for his betrayal. Instead, it left me feeling oddly melancholy, not for Daniel specifically, but for the wreckage relationships could leave in their wake, even for the person who caused the destruction. The following week passed in a blur of end-of-semester activities at school. The curriculum collaboration with Luke culminated in a joint presentation day, where students from our respective classes shared research projects examining civil rights literature alongside historical documents. The success of the venture led to congratulations from the department head and suggestions that we expand the collaboration for the spring semester. "We make a good team," Luke observed as we gathered student materials after the final presentation. "Your literary analysis expertise complements my historical context approach perfectly. We do work well together," I agreed, feeling a subtle shift in the air between us as our eyes met. Over the past months, our professional relationship had developed an undercurrent of personal connection that neither of us had explicitly acknowledged. Luke hesitated, then set down the papers he'd been organizing. "Emma, I've been wanting to ask you something, but I've been concerned about timing and appropriateness, given that we're colleagues and your divorce is relatively recent." My heart performed an unexpected flutter that I quickly attributed to surprise rather than anticipation. "What is it? Would you be interested in having dinner sometime? Not coffee, not curriculum planning, an actual date?" The words came out in a rush, followed immediately by, "It's completely fine if you're not ready or interested. Our working relationship is important to me, and I wouldn't want to jeopardize that." The invitation hung between us, transforming the familiar classroom into suddenly charged territory. Luke watched me with careful eyes, his expression open and slightly vulnerable in a way Daniel's never had been. I began, then stopped, genuinely uncertain of my answer. Was I ready to date? The idea seemed simultaneously appealing and terrifying. "Can I think about it?" Relief softened his features. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The invitation stands whenever, if ever, you're ready." His gracious response only increased my confusion. Luke was everything Daniel wasn't: straightforward, considerate, respectful of boundaries. By any objective measure, dinner with him would be pleasant, possibly even enjoyable. Yet something held me back. Not lingering feelings for Daniel, but perhaps lingering wounds from what Daniel had done. Trust, once shattered, proved difficult to reassemble, even for someone who had given me no reason to doubt him. That evening, as I prepared a solitary dinner in my kitchen, my phone buzzed with an email notification from Patricia. The subject line read simply, "Foundation dissolution paperwork. Review required." I opened the message to find the documents Daniel had promised, forwarded from his attorney to Patricia, and now to me. As Patricia had predicted, the terms appeared straightforward and equitable: an even division of assets after administrative costs, with a timeline for liquidation and distribution tied to the sale of Daniel's firm in mid-December. What caught my attention, however, was an addendum regarding the Foundation's final philanthropic act, a substantial donation to an arts program at a school in the Bronx where I'd once volunteered. The program had been struggling for funding, something I'd mentioned to Daniel years ago but had assumed he'd forgotten. Yet here it was, a six-figure gift in both our names as the Foundation's final act before dissolution. The gesture was so unexpected, so uncharacteristically thoughtful, that I read the clause 3 times to ensure I hadn't misunderstood. Daniel, who had dismissed my volunteer work as well-intentioned but inefficient charity, had remembered not just the program but its significance to me. I set my phone down slowly, processing this anomaly in my understanding of the man I'd been married to for 5 years. Had there been depths to him I'd never accessed? Or was this a calculated final move in his personal chess game, designed to leave me with complicated feelings about his character? The question lingered as I responded to Patricia, confirming that the paperwork looked acceptable pending her legal review. Whether Daniel's motivation was genuine altruism or sophisticated manipulation, the outcome remained positive. A struggling arts program would receive crucial funding, and I would gain financial independence beyond what the divorce had already secured. 2 days later, I found myself across from Luke at a small Italian restaurant in Sag Harbor, having accepted his dinner invitation after considerable deliberation. The setting was intimate but not overly romantic, a wise choice that established the evening as a date without setting expectations too high. "I'm glad you said yes." Luke admitted as we settled into our booth, though I was prepared for a very gracious letdown. I smiled, appreciating his honesty. I almost gave you one, not because I don't enjoy your company, but because dating after divorce is terrifying, he supplied. Trust me, I remember. My first post-divorce date was a catastrophe. I talked about my ex for 45 minutes straight before realizing what I was doing. His self-deprecating candor eased my tension. Well, you've set the bar low. As long as I don't spend the entire evening discussing Daniel, I'm ahead of the game. Luke laughed, raising his water glass in a mock toast. To extremely modest expectations, the evening flowed with surprising ease after that. We discussed books, travel experiences, and teaching philosophies. Luke shared stories about growing up in a large Irish Catholic family in South Boston, complete with self-mocking impressions of his grandfather's impenetrable accent. I told him about my college years studying abroad in England and my brief, disastrous attempt at writing a novel before I found my calling in teaching. What we didn't discuss was equally significant: our former spouses. Unlike my few previous attempts at social outings, where well-meaning friends had encouraged me to process, by rehashing Daniel's betrayal, this evening existed in its own space, unclouded by marital ghosts. As Luke walked me to my car after dinner, the inevitable moment of first-date awkwardness descended. Would he try to kiss me? Did I want him to? He solved the dilemma with characteristic thoughtfulness, taking my hand briefly and squeezing it with a warm smile. I had a wonderful time, Emma. I'd love to do this again if you're interested. The gesture was perfect. Affectionate without pressure, acknowledging the connection between us while respecting the careful pace I needed. I'd like that, I replied, surprised by how genuinely I meant it. As I drove home, I realized something significant had shifted during the evening. For the first time since discovering Daniel's betrayal, I had spent hours without that relationship defining my thoughts or emotions. I had been simply Emma, not Daniel's ex-wife, not the woman who'd been betrayed, just myself, enjoying the company of an intelligent, kind man who seemed to value exactly who I was. The realization brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not of sadness but of relief. Perhaps healing wasn't just about processing pain or achieving concrete victories like keeping the house. Perhaps it was also about reclaiming the ability to exist fully in moments unclouded by past wounds. When I arrived home, I found an email from Patricia confirming that the foundation dissolution paperwork was legally sound and ready for my signature. Attached was a revised draft including one small change I'd requested. The donation to the Bronx Arts Program would be made solely in my name, not jointly with Daniel's. His final act of generosity, if that's what it was, would remain between us, not publicly documented. I electronically signed the documents and returned them to Patricia, then poured myself a small glass of wine and carried it out to the terrace. The November night was chilly but clear, stars scattered across the dark canvas above like spilled diamonds. In the distance, I could hear the rhythmic pulse of the ocean, a sound that had once been the soundtrack to Daniel's grand promises about our future in this house. Now it was simply the sound of my present, my reality, beautiful in its constancy, indifferent to the human dramas that unfolded against its backdrop. The ocean had witnessed my marriage and my betrayal. It would witness whatever came next with equal impartiality. My phone buzzed with a text from Luke. Made it home safely. Thanks again for a lovely evening. Sleep well. I smiled at the simple consideration of the message. No pressure for immediate plans, just a thoughtful check-in. I responded with similar brevity, then set my phone aside, returning my attention to the night sky and the gradual untangling of complicated emotions within my chest. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of end-of-semester activities, final projects to grade, recommendation letters to write for college-bound seniors, holiday events to attend. Luke and I settled into a comfortable rhythm of casual dates interspersed with our professional collaboration, each interaction building a foundation of trust and mutual understanding that felt entirely different from the intense, consuming connection I'd formed with Daniel years ago. Where Daniel had been all passion and grand gestures, Luke offered steady warmth and authentic presence. Where Daniel had dominated conversations with brilliant monologues, Luke listened as much as he spoke, genuinely interested in my thoughts. The contrast should have felt jarring, but instead it highlighted how much I'd compromised in my marriage without even realizing it. December 15th arrived, the day Daniel's firm sale would finalize, triggering the foundation dissolution and his departure for London. I'd received no further communication from him since his visit to collect the ring, which suited me perfectly. Our business was concluded, our lives had diverged completely. That evening, as a winter storm gathered strength outside, I built a fire in the living room hearth and settled onto the sofa with a glass of wine and the novel I'd been too distracted to finish for months. The house creaked and settled around me, no longer feeling emptied by Daniel's absence, but comfortably filled with my solitary presence. My phone rang, startling me from my reading. The international number on the screen made my heart skip. Daniel calling from London. I hesitated, tempted to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. "Hello, Emma." His voice sounded distant, slightly distorted by the international connection. "Sorry to call so late. I wanted to let you know the sale finalized today. The foundation dissolution should process this week, and you'll receive the distribution by the end of the month." "Thank you for updating me," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Patricia mentioned the timeline. "Congratulations on completing the sale." A pause stretched between us, filled with static and unspoken complexities. "I'm in London now," he finally continued. "Permanently, I assumed." I took a sip of wine, wondering why he'd really called. The financial update could have been handled by attorneys. The donation to the Bronx Arts Program. I saw you had my name removed. Ah, so that was it. It seemed appropriate. It's my name on the check, my connection to the program. Another pause. "It was a genuine gesture, Emma. Not manipulation or an attempt to change your opinion of me. Just recognition of something that mattered to you." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. "Thank you," I said finally. "Whatever the motivation, the program needs the funds. They'll do good work with it." "I know they will." He cleared his throat slightly. "I'm not calling to disrupt your life or reopen old wounds. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Truly. Not just for the affairs, but for all of it. The lies, the control, the person I was with you. You deserved better." The apology landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through my carefully constructed equilibrium. In all our negotiations, legal maneuvers, and financial settlements, we had never had this simple human exchange. Acknowledgement of wrong, expression of regret. "Why now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Why apologize when you're safely across an ocean?" "Because I couldn't say it to your face," he admitted. "My pride wouldn't let me. And because I'm trying to start over here with some measure of, I don't know, integrity maybe, whatever that means at this point." I considered his words, testing them for the calculated manipulation that had been his hallmark. To my surprise, they rang true, perhaps the first completely honest thing he'd said to me in years. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally. "I hope you find what you're looking for in London. And you, Emma? Have you found what you're looking for there?" The question was presumptuous, yet somehow not unwelcome, an acknowledgement that my life continued, evolved, reshaped itself in his absence. "I'm finding my way," I replied truthfully. "The house helps. It's becoming truly mine now." "It always was," he said quietly. "Even when my name was on the deed, no one else could have made it what it is." A beat of silence. "I should go. It's late there and I have meetings in the morning. Take care of yourself, Emma. You too, Daniel." The call ended, and I set my phone down slowly, processing the unexpected closure his apology had provided. It didn't erase the pain or justify the betrayal, but it did something I hadn't anticipated. It released the last lingering thread of bitterness I'd been carrying. Daniel was simply a flawed human who had made terrible choices that hurt me deeply. Not a monster, not a mastermind, just a broken person who had broken something precious. And I had survived. More than survived, I had rebuilt, reclaimed, renewed. A text notification broke my reflection. Luke, asking if I'd like to attend the symphony in the city that weekend. I smiled at the invitation, feeling a lightness in my response that had nothing to do with Daniel's call and everything to do with the new possibilities unfolding before me. The week before Christmas, a certified letter arrived containing confirmation of the foundation dissolution and a check for a sum that still seemed surreal in its magnitude. I deposited it immediately, then spent a quiet evening by the fire, considering what this final financial tie with Daniel represented. Not just money, but complete independence. The freedom to shape my life exactly as I wished, without compromise or constraint. I could continue teaching because I loved it, not because I needed the salary. I could travel during summers, renovate the house to perfectionist standards, establish my own foundation if I chose. The possibilities stretched before me like an open road, and for the first time in months, I felt nothing but anticipation for the journey ahead. Christmas arrived with a gentle snowfall that transformed the grounds into a winter wonderland. I'd decided to host a small gathering rather than travel to my mother's as in previous years, a symbolic reclaiming of holiday traditions on my own terms. Mia and her boyfriend came, bringing ridiculous quantities of food and wine. Several colleagues from school attended, including Luke, who arrived early to help with preparations and stayed late to assist with cleanup. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Luke and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, putting away leftovers in comfortable silence. "Thank you for including me tonight," he said, closing the refrigerator and leaning against the counter. "It meant a lot." "I'm glad you came," I replied honestly. "It wouldn't have been the same without you." He studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You seem different tonight. More settled somehow." The observation was perceptive. "I feel different," I admitted. "Like I've finally stopped looking backward and started looking forward." Luke nodded understanding. "That's a significant milestone. In my experience, it doesn't happen all at once. It creeps up on you until suddenly you realize you've been thinking about the future more than the past." "Exactly that." I smiled, appreciating his intuitive grasp of my experience. "It's been a process." He moved closer, his expression turning serious. "Emma, I know we've been taking things very slowly, and I respect that completely. But I want to be clear about something. I'm not just passing time with you or looking for casual company. I care about you deeply. Wherever this goes, however long it takes, that's my starting point." The declaration was gentle but unmistakable in its intent, a clear statement of serious interest without applying pressure for immediate reciprocation. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful communication I'd never experienced with Daniel, whose emotional expressions had always carried subtle manipulations or expectations. I took a deep breath, considering my response carefully. "I care about you too," I said finally, "more than I expected to or thought I was capable of after everything. But I'm still finding my footing as just myself, not as someone's wife or ex-wife. I need to move at a pace that honors that process." Luke's smile was warm, without a trace of disappointment at my measured response. "That makes perfect sense to me. I'm not going anywhere, Emma. There's no rush." The simple acceptance in his words unwound something tight in my chest. This was what healthy connection felt like: mutual respect, clear communication, absence of pressure or manipulation. As the winter snow continued falling outside, creating a cocoon of peaceful isolation around the house, Luke and I moved to the living room and settled before the dying fire with glasses of wine. The conversation shifted to plans for the coming year, my ideas for renovating the eastern wing of the house, his summer research project on Revolutionary War sites in New England, potential curriculum collaborations for the spring semester. We talked about futures, separate but with points of intersection, possibilities without promises, hopes without demands. It was the most honest conversation I'd had about tomorrow in longer than I could remember. When Luke finally departed just before midnight, our goodbye held a new quality of promise. Not just the customary kiss on the cheek we'd established over previous dates, but a proper kiss, gentle, brief, but unmistakably crossing the line from friendship into something more. "Merry Christmas, Emma," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Luke." I watched his car navigate the snow-covered drive until the taillights disappeared into the darkness. Then I closed the door against the winter chill and turned back to my house, my beautiful, reclaimed house, filled now with new memories layered over the old like fresh paint on weathered walls. In the quiet aftermath of the gathering, I moved through rooms still bearing evidence of celebration: empty wine glasses on side tables, gift-wrapped scraps beneath the tree, the lingering scent of pine and cinnamon. This had been my first holiday entertaining as a single woman, and the success of the evening felt like confirmation that I was truly moving forward rather than simply surviving. I paused at the living room windows, gazing out at the moonlit snow transforming my garden into a silver-etched wonderland. The scene was postcard perfect, reminiscent of the future Daniel had once promised, forever together in this beautiful house, building a life of enviable elegance. The reality had proved both better and worse than that fantasy. Worse, in the pain of betrayal and collapse, the humiliation of discovering I'd been deceived so thoroughly, the grief of losing a future I'd believed in completely. But better, in the strength I'd discovered within myself, the authentic connections I'd formed after dropping the veneer of perfect marriage, the independence I'd claimed rather than been granted. Daniel had promised forever together. Instead, I'd found forever mine, the $1 million house that now truly belonged to me alone, the financial independence that secured my future, and perhaps most importantly, the self-knowledge that I could survive devastation and rebuild something meaningful from the rubble. As for the new love hinted at in my emerging connection with Luke, that remained a story still being written. Each page turned slowly and with care. Unlike the whirlwind passion that had characterized my relationship with Daniel, this potential future unfolded at a measured pace, built on respect and honest communication rather than intensity and grand promises. Forever together had been a beautiful lie. Forever mine was a hard-won truth. And as I finally turned away from the window and headed upstairs to my reclaimed bedroom, I found myself surprisingly grateful for both, for the dream that had broken and the reality I had built from its pieces. Some promises were made to be broken, it seemed, making room for the truths that waited beyond them. Daniel had never delivered the forever he'd promised. But standing in his place, in the $1 million house that now bore only my imprint, with the possibility of new love gradually taking root, I had discovered something far more valuable, the forever I'd promised myself.